Okay, we've had quite a few more people join us just in the last couple of minutes. So I'm going to go over our instructions one more time, and then we're going to hand it over to our first speaker. I will note we're also recording this webinar, so if anybody has to leave early or they're having issues or something, we will be recording it and making it available later for repeated viewing. So just to let you know that. So for anybody that's not familiar, my name is Ryan Barrett, and I'm the research coordinator at the PEI Potato Board, and I'm also chair of the PEI Wireworm Working Group, which has representatives of multiple industry partners, including the Department of Agriculture, the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, PMRA. We have some grower and local agronomist representatives on that group as well, and then the PEI Horticultural Association. So we thank you for taking the time to attend today. We have some really good presenters that are going to talk about some of the work that's been going on in PEI the last couple of years on wireworm. It's one of the biggest challenges that our industry has faced over probably the last decade of potato production in PEI, and we're fortunate to have some really good researchers that are working on this for us and helping us to come up with solutions, tools for the toolbox in managing wireworm. So this is our agenda for today. Starting here very shortly, we're going to start with Dr. Christine Norohna from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who's going to talk about her research program. She's the principal investigator for the current national cluster project on wireworm. So Christine's going to talk about primarily her work on rotational crops and pesticides to control wireworm. Then Dr. Suqi Liu is going to talk to us about the work that she's been doing on how buckwheat impacts wireworms in mixture with other rotational crops. So she's been doing quite a bit of work on that the last year or two. We then have Lorraine MacKinnon from the PEI Department of Agriculture. Lorraine's going to talk about the results of our click beetle survey from last year. We've done that survey every 3 years or so in the last number of years to get an idea of where we're at for click beetle numbers and as a proxy for levels of wireworm in the province and how they differ in different parts of PEI. And then we're going to finish our seminar with Sebastian Ibarra from the Department of Agriculture as well. And Sebastian is going to update us a little bit on where we're at currently in terms of the status of wireworm insecticides, both current products as well as moving forward where we stand on that. And then we'll have a little bit of wrap up at the end, and we'll have some chance for questions. So if you missed it from before, if you're a CCA and you'd like to receive CEUs for this meeting, please, you can either scan the QR code that you see on your screen right now using the CCA app, or you can send me your name and CCA number in the Q&A window, and I'll mark those down and send those into the CCA office. So with that, as I said, if you have questions, you can feel free to pose them using that Q&A app. We did solicit questions from growers in advance of the meeting. And we were able to do that and integrate many of those questions into the presentations today. So thank you for your questions. If there are questions that after each of the presentations, we'll stop for a second and send your questions in using the Q&A app, Q&A window there, and then I will pose the questions to the presenter, panelist. So. With that, I think we'll get going. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Christine, I'm going to ask you to start sharing your screen and turn on your microphone, and you can take it away.
Okay, Brian. Okay, let's try and All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone's keeping healthy. Today, there's two parts to my presentation today. The first part is I'm going to share some of the research that we did and give you some information that's probably going to be helpful when you're setting up your plans for your fields this spring. And the second part of my presentation is answering some of the questions that you sent in. So I'm going to start off with um, those of you who don't know wireworms. They're the larvae of click beetles. They live in the soil for 3 to 5 years. They feed on a large number of crops. But the most damage is caused to root crops, and the damage to root crops can actually make the crop unmarketable. Little bit about the life cycle. The adults, they come out in the spring around beginning of May is when they come out, and they're there for two months when they're very active. After that, you see some beetles, but you don't but they're not as active at that time, and just a few of them go into July and August, but excuse me, most of the time it's May and June when they're the most active. They lay their eggs in the soil and the larvae hatch, and then these larvae will feed on the roots of different crops. In the spring they feed on seedlings, and in the fall they feed on the crop. And this is the stage that causes the most damage, because they're there for 3 to 5 years in the soil. So once eggs are laid in the field, you have larvae in that field for 3 to 5 years, after which they become they pupate, and then they become adults. They become adults again, and the whole cycle starts all over again. So a little bit of the history of where we were and where we've come. So the first report of a crop failure that I received was in 2004. And at that time, thiamate was the only chemical that was registered, but it was under reevaluation by PMRA, and it was slated to be taken off the market. And we were seeing, we have noticed like an increase in populations as years passed. More and more growers were telling us about that they were having problems with wireworms. So we started doing a lot of research around trying to manage this pest. So the first step was we had 48 species. We knew we had 48 species of click beetles. But the first step was to find out which of those species was the damaging species, and we found out that it was Agriotis sputata. We also have Agriotis obscurus and lineatus. These are European species. They also cause damage in Europe, but Agriotis sputata was the one that was the most, that caused the most damage in our area. We've also found another species called Hypnoidus abbreviatus, and that one we are looking into. We don't have as much information about it, but we are looking into that species as well. So in order to understand an insect, you really need to know the biology, because the biology shows you the weak links that you can, where you can actually use a control method. So one of the things that we did was looking at the biology of Agriotis sputata. And what we found was the beetles emerge in early May, and they're there until June. They peak in June, and then you have the adults. The adults keep, the fewer numbers in July, but that's May and June is when they are the most active. They start laying their eggs around the beginning of June, and then in late June and early July late June is when you start having the peak in egg laying happens at that time. And you know that they start to hatch. So when they're hatching, it's like mid to late June is when they're hatching, and also in July is when they are there. You find all these really tiny neonate larvae. They're called neonates because they're newly hatched larvae, and they're called neonates. So that's what we find at that time of the year. So now we know when they are laying eggs and when they actually are larvae, so that if we ever find a method to attack this stage, we know exactly when they are there for us to use a control method. What we also found out was the time when when the potatoes are in the soil, like what stage the potatoes are at when the larvae are hatching. And here you can see that it's growth stage 3, and between growth stage 3 and growth stage 4 is when you see the larvae are actually hatching, and they are there to feed on the tubers and the newly formed tubers, and on the roots of these crops. We've also found that they are mostly present in the upper layers of the soil. That's where they lay their eggs, the upper 2 centimeters of the soil. Now, this is important, may not seem that important, but it is important from a research perspective, because if we are actually trying to control this insect, and if we can find a method to control the eggs, then we know that it is within those upper 2 centimeters is when we are going to actually we'll be able to control those eggs. So it's just some information that is helpful for us. So we've done a lot of efficacy trials. I've been doing this since 2000, even before we found out we had wireworms here. We've always been doing insecticide efficacy trials, and we look at the number of the holes on the tubers, and also from the processing industry standards. We use those to know what the marketable yield is after you remove all the damage that the wireworms have done. So it has been very challenging to do this, because the wireworms respond very differently to some of the newer chemicals. But we've evaluated registered products, new chemistries, as well as product combinations, because sometimes it's when you combine 2 different products, it gives you better control than if you're just using one. So we've tried all these different combinations, as well as registered products. So here's a list of what we've used. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just a smaller list of some of the products that we have tested. So you can see here we have tested 4,8-thimet, and yes, it does reduce damage. The reduction over, I've looked at this data over 10 years of data from every year that we have tested the thimet, and the range of reduction that we get varies every year, and it can go anywhere from 50% to 70%. We did trials to look at what it actually does, and it actually kills the wireworms. But you can see what the big range that it has here. Clothianidin, it gave me a range from 5 to 59 over all these years. So some years it'll work really well, and some years it won't work, and that's why I have a question mark right here. It does work, but some years it for whatever reason it's not working. But clothianidin actually just paralyzes the insect, so it doesn't kill the wireworm. It just paralyzes it. Clothianidin with capture, like Titan with capture, gave us between 48 and 67%, and once again it only paralyzes. Thimethoxam, that's cruiser, didn't work for us on our species. Capture on its own without any combination gave us 43 to 78% reduction in damage, and it actually just paralyzes. Matador really didn't work for us at all. It was 1 to 27%, which is really not very good. We have tried Force, that's difluthrin, and it gives us anywhere from 30 to 55%. It does kill the wireworms. I want to do some more studies on this to see if there is a way to increase this. 55% is okay, but it's not good. I don't consider it very good control at 55%. We looked at Movento with Titan. We also had experimental products. One of those, we have several experimental products, but one of those that I thought I'd put up here is we looked at wheat treated seeds with fipronil, and we got very low percentage in reduction of damage. Cyazypyr, Nimitz, then none of these gave us reduction in damage. We do have a newer product that we've been looking at for about 5 years now, and that product has given us, it's similar to Thimet. It also kills. The information that we have gathered over these 5 years has now been used by the company, and a file has been put in for registration to PMRA. It's still not registered, but it has been submitted. So hopefully, we don't know when it's going to be. When and if it is going to be registered, but we know that it has been submitted. Moving on to some of our cultural control practices that we have done over the years, we've looked at different susceptibility of different potato varieties, and here's a list of what we found. This is without an insecticide, so this is really what the variety itself is resistant or susceptible to wireworms. And as you can see, some of the FL varieties are give you they're not as susceptible or not as attractive to wireworms, whereas you have the Norlands here that are really attractive, and the Eva is really attractive. So this is important information because it gives you information as to if you are going to use, if you can change your varieties, you can go with the less susceptible variety. If you're going with a more susceptible variety, then you know that you do have to use an insecticide in order to protect that variety. So some of the take-home messages from this would be that we know now that the varieties differ in attractiveness. We have a list of varieties that we know are the susceptibility range of those varieties. And like I had just mentioned, we know now that if we are using a susceptible variety, we need to use an insecticide at planting. Looking at plow down, we growers have been using clover. We do need clover to feed our animals, but if you plow down green material, it gives food for wireworms. So and then it gives food early in the season, and then when you go in late, and then later on when the green material has deteriorated, the wireworms go after your potatoes. So we were trying to figure out what is the best way to do this. So if you have 2 years of clover growing, how are you going to move forward with trying not to get giving food to those wireworms? So one of the methods that was being used was to either plow down in the spring, in the fall, and that's not good, because then you have bare soil all winter long, and you have a lot of soil erosion that happens. So it's not really a very good practice. You could kill the sod with glyphosate, but we wanted to see what actually is the best method that is environmentally friendly as well as protects your soil. So we did a study where we looked at use of glyphosate, no glyphosate, and spring plowed versus fall plowed. And this is what we found. So now these two bars, the yellow and the red bar, are fall plowed green material. So we didn't kill the sod. We just plowed it down either in the spring or the fall, and you can see the damage is pretty high. And then we had the spring plowed with or without glyphosate. And once again, you can see that the damage is a little bit is lower, significantly lower, but there's no difference between the fall versus the spring. So this is once again very good information, because you know now that you don't need to plow it down in the fall, or kill the sod and plow it in the fall. You can just leave it, and if you kill it in the spring and plow it, you will still have it still works towards wireworm reduction. So the take-home messages are, killing sod in the spring before planting provides reduction in wireworm damage. So what happens is, when you kill the sod in the spring and you plow it under, the wireworms don't have any food to eat. You're planting your potatoes, and you're putting an insecticide down. So they are going to those potatoes because there's no other food. They are going to those potatoes, contacting the insecticide and dying. That's how this whole system works. You do not need to kill the sod in the fall, which is really a good soil conservation method. So that's what came out of that research. We did the crop. Moving on to crop rotation, so we have done this study where we looked at the mustard and the buckwheat. This is being used quite a lot on the island. Many of you are familiar with using the brown mustard and buckwheat. It's a very and you have to plow it. You have to incorporate the crop and then put another crop in. So when we did our original study, where you incorporate the crop and then you put a second crop in, you do this for 2 years. And this is the type of protection we got for our tubers. And you can see here barley, the percent marketable tubers is fairly low as compared to if you had brown mustard or buckwheat, and tubers lost too. You had 36% lost at the barley, and only 2 or 7% lost at that if you had brown mustard or buckwheat. Now this is a very extreme measure, but we were dealing with an extreme situation where populations were getting really high and growers were losing entire crops. So we started off with an extreme measure of using this, where you have 2 crops, 2 years, and you had a plow down of the first crop, and then you're planting your second crop. So we started with that, but then we wanted to see how can we make this better so that it's more economically more sustainable for growers. So in order to do that, we decided, okay, we know that the extreme measure works. We know if you disc it in, it works. But what if you just mow it, and that would save you from from buying seed for a second crop? So what if you do that? What if you mowed it, you disked it, or you harvested the crop? So we looked at those strategies to find out, and also if you can grow it for 1 year versus 2 years. So in this situation, we did a study where we looked at growing it for 1 year, and we clipped it or mowed it, incorporated it, or took it for seed. And as you can see, it doesn't matter how you grow, as long as you're growing your mustard, doesn't matter what you're doing with it, you get lower. You get a reduction in damage as compared to if you used a barley crop. And this is just for 1 year. So you can use it for 1 year. Now this field that I'm talking about, it had a moderate to low wireworm population. So that's why you're seeing this. We only used it for 1 year. A moderate population, you can use one year of grow mustard for 1 year and you'll be fine. We looked at buckwheat. Now, this was a field that had a very high population of wireworms. So we did do this for 2 years. And you can see once again, there's no difference between the disc and the mold. But if you grew barley, or if you had clover, you had higher numbers of wireworms. So as you can see, it doesn't matter as long as the crop is in there in the field. You can just mow it. You don't have to grow a second crop. So the take-home points here from all this research that we've been doing is the first point is you need to evaluate your field to find out what the population is. Once you know what your population is, then you can make a management decision as to what option are you going to use. If your levels are low, medium to low, you can use either you can grow mustard or buckwheat for 1 year, before your potatoes. If your population is really high, you do need to use it for 2 years. That's the only way you can reduce your population enough and get a reduction in damage to your cash crop, which is your potatoes. Now, we do know that you can mow the crop, so you don't need to have a second crop. To plant a second crop, you can incorporate it, or you can harvest the crop and actually sell it. And either of these methods is going to give you wireworm reduction in damage. Incorporation actually provides some biofumigation action, and that we know controls diseases and nematodes. So depending on what you want to do in your field, you have to make that decision. You have to look at your field and see what is the objective. What do you want to control in that field? Is it a disease? Is it wireworms? Or is it nematodes? So based on that, you can actually decide if you want to biofumigate your field. If you have nematodes, you want to biofumigate it, then you have to incorporate the crop. If you're just going after wireworms, you don't have a disease or nematode problem, then you can just grow your crop, mow it, and let it be all winter long, and then next year you can plant your potatoes. So it all depends on what you want to do in that particular field. You all know your fields. You know what the problem is in each of your fields. So each field has to be taken separately, and decisions have to be made per field on what your objective is for that particular field. Now, a growing crop of mustard and buckwheat, most crops they exude certain chemicals into the soil surrounding their roots. So there is a certain amount of fumigation that's happening, but it's at a very low level. So you don't see, you see a little bit of decrease, but really not significant. So it's the biofumigation, it's the plow down that really works. There is a market for brown mustard now on the island, and there's potential for a buckwheat market as well. That's actually in the process of being developed. Okay, so moving on to mowing, we did some studies looking at the mowing of brown mustard or buckwheat. How do you mow it? How high do you mow it? That kind of work that we did. So we looked at either a 4-inch height, 8 inches, or 12 inches, and we used different mowers. So here's pictures for a flail mower, and as you can see, if you get an 8-inch height, the crop starts to grow again. You can see some flowers there, 8-inch and 12 inches. The same with the disc mower. When you have 8 inches, you see some growth, but what the disc mower also did is it left a lot of debris on top, and this basically killed the crop that was under it. And if you used a rotary mower, once again, the 4 inches, you don't see any regrowth, but you do see some regrowth in the 8 and 12-inch cut. So if you're a farmer and you are worried about having seed in your field the following year, you would go to mowing mowing the crop a little bit from 4 to 6 inches, because if you mow it 8 inches or 12 inches, it's going to seed. It's going to start producing flowers, and it's going to seed. You're going to have to do a second cut of that, and you're going to have to monitor it all the time. So if you are concerned about that. Now, mustard and buckwheat are both crops, so as a result, they can be killed by a herbicide. So it's but if you are concerned, then I would go between 4 and 6 inches. That's what would give you no regrowth. We found that the disc mower was not really good. It left a lot of debris and killed the crop. If you cut it to 4 to 6 inches, you still have the roots. They remain alive, and they're still producing chemicals. So the wireworms feeding on those roots will still die. We did some work on buckwheat. We were not sure. We know how mustard works, but we were not sure about buckwheat. Like, how does that work? Mustard has the glucosinolates that actually are toxic to wireworms, to any insects feeding on them actually. But the buckwheat, we didn't know how it worked. So we were looking at that, and we found that the buckwheat, if we fed the buckwheat to the neonates, these are the really tiny wireworms, we found that there was a reduction in damage, in survival. So very few survived on the buckwheat as compared to the barley. We did this with the larger wireworms as well. So buckwheat is actually killing the wireworms. It doesn't allow them to grow. They don't grow as well, and as a result, in the end, after a while of feeding on buckwheat, if that's the only crop they have to feed on, they will feed on it, and then in the end they will die. So it does reduce the population. We also did work in the field where we looked at what if there are other options for the wireworms as buckwheat, and then there's also other crops around that they could feed on, and we found that they actually like buckwheat. So this is really good news for us, because if they like buckwheat and buckwheat kills them, that's really good. So if there are other weeds or other crops in the field, buckwheat, they would still go to buckwheat, and it will kill them. And Suqi is going to talk to you more about this and how we have taken this further. We didn't stop here. We have taken this information and moved further with it, and she's going to talk to you about that. Moving on to mechanical control and monitoring that we have worked with. So my colleague in British Columbia, Dr. Bob Vernon, he developed this trap. It's a really nice trap, and it's for pheromones to use to monitor click beetles, and it's species specific. So you can put your pheromone in there, and it's very easy to use. It's a really nice trap. And then we have the Nell trap, which is a light-based trap which attracts the females and the males, males of several different species. So we decided to look at this from an integrated pest management standpoint, like how can we use this, since we know that we can trap significant numbers of males and females in a field. We wanted to know, can we actually use it during the non crop years, so the rotation crop years, and put these traps in the field and catch females before they start laying their eggs, and in this way reduce the damage, that is reduce the number of eggs that are being laid in that field. So you would need like a foot of area in your field. You can work all around it, that's okay, and just put these traps out in there between from May to the end of June, and try to catch those females before they lay their eggs. So this project is underway right now. We're still working on it, and we're going to continue to work on this for the next few years. And we'd have to do it for a few years before we really find out what if it works or it doesn't work. Dr. Vernon also found that using these traps, he developed a risk assessment fact sheet, and this fact sheet is on the PEI Potato Board's web sheet if anybody wants to know on how to use this monitoring to predict future damage. We looked at wireworm movement, like how they move horizontally and vertically in the soil. For horizontal movement, we were looking at how fast do they move with up to 3.6 meters in search of a food source. And we found that they can move pretty fast. We sort of knew that they move really fast because whenever we had them in the lab, they were moving quite quickly, but we didn't know how fast they move. But you can see within one day, they can move 3.66 meters. And so it's pretty good. Even the smaller ones can move 3.6 meters in one day, and that's a pretty long distance for a tiny wireworm. So we know that they're fairly mobile. They can move to a food source. So if there is if there's no food in a certain area, they will actually move quite quickly to find food. We looked at vertical movement, and here you can see that in November they're starting to go down. They stay below the frost line all of December, January, February, March. April is starting to come up, but it's actually in May and June is when they're up at the surface. Now this information is this tells us that when we can actually put baits in to get a good estimate of what your population is. So if you go in April and put your baits in, you may find absolutely no wireworms there. And you may think, oh, well, this field is clean. I can go and put my potatoes, and then the potatoes get hammered with wireworm damage. So we know now that it's best to put your traps in May or June, and that's when you can actually evaluate what your populations are. We did work on some of the neonate larvae to see how fast they move in the soil. Everybody, the common knowledge out there was that the neonates are very fragile, but when we were working with them, we realized they're not that fragile. So we wanted to see how fast would they move to a food source. And we found that they too can move really fast. And these neonates are barely visible to the naked eye. They're really small, but over 70% move at least 6 inches. And they move within 24 hours. Some of them even move 12 inches. So they can move long distances in search of food. So leaving a field fallow, which is really not a good agronomic practice. But if it is done to kill these worms, you're not going to do that. So really, it is not a recommended practice to leave your field fallow for any length of time, because they are just going to move to search for food, and they will survive. So this is what has come out of this research, knowledge that has come out of this research. So you can see here within 48 hours, they can move 18 inches. They can move pretty fast, these worms. So the take-home message is larvae can travel long distances in search of food. The neonates are not as fragile as what we thought they were. They overwinter just below the frost line, and they can move with the frost line. So really, we cannot expect high mortality over the winter months, because they are able to just move below the frost line. The best time to bait for wireworms is May. That's in the spring, and in the fall the best time is mid-September to mid-October. So that's the best time to evaluate if what your field population is. Okay, so that's the research part of this presentation. I'm just going to move on to the questions that came in. Okay, so the first question that came in was which past, present, and potential new wireworm insecticide cause mortality in approximate percentages. I've already addressed this at the beginning of the presentation when I gave the information about which chemicals we have tested and what were the percentage of mortality that we saw. So this has already been addressed. We'll go to part 2 of this question. This question has 2 parts. The first part is, do any of these crops we use to control wireworms actually work? And my answer to that is yes. We have been doing this for years now. The first trial was done, that the data that I showed you was completed in 2009, 2010, and since then we have been repeating this in commercial fields over and over again. And yes, we have always seen a significant reduction in damage following a brown mustard or a buckwheat crop. Here's a little bit more information about the rotation crop that rotation study that we did. We did this in 3 different fields. This is just information from one of these fields. This is the original study, and you can see the number of holes is significantly lower than when you had barley. And the tonnage lost as well is significantly lower. So this does work. It worked in all 3 fields. I showed you this data as well, where you can use it for 1 year and you're still getting a significant decrease in wireworm damage to your tubers. And if you grow it, and also the same for buckwheat, it doesn't matter if it's disked or mowed, you're still getting, as long as the crop is in there, you are getting reduction in damage. Oops. Okay, so question B of that first question says, we tend to plant these crops late in the spring when the beetle is finishing its cycle to lay eggs. So it stands to reason that there will be less wireworm damage in future years. Okay, so the beetles here do not lay their eggs on the plants. They're not really attracted to the plants themselves. The eggs are laid in the soil. So considering that it's in the soil that they will go and they lay their eggs. Now let's look at the biology of this insect. Here we find that they're laying eggs in June, and they are hatching in July. Normally these plants are planted, any plants, you normally you have plants planted by mid-June. Most of your planting is done by mid-June, and you have a crop. No matter what crop it is, you have a crop in June and into July. So the wireworms are hatching at that time. So no matter what crop you have, they are feeding at that time. You do have a crop there and they are feeding at that time. So it's best to have a crop at that time that is a wireworm suppressive crop, so that you can actually suppress these little worms from while they're free feeding. So it's not, it doesn't matter how many adults were there at the beginning. If they lay their eggs in June, it's June and July when you are looking at the population feeding on crops, and at that time you always have a crop. So really the crop is giving significant control of these wireworms. And we know that if you have a buckwheat crop, you do have less survival in those crops. So I hope I've answered that question, that it doesn't matter. Even though you're planting late, you are still getting the wireworms that are feeding on those crops. When planting hot mustard to mulch and incorporate to kill, when wireworms may be present, can you have a measurable gain in killing nematodes? The answer is yes. We have, there's a lot of literature that states that mulching mustard and for green manure reduces disease and such as verticillium and nematodes. So it's present in the literature. But in addition to that, there have been other studies that have been done on the island that I'm going to show you. One of those is a study that's done by my colleague, Dr. Aaron Mills. He's a researcher at the Charlottetown Research Center. And he has shown that when you grow buckwheat, doesn't matter if you disc it, you flail it, you incorporate it when you disc it, you flail it, or you grow it for seed, you have a reduction in your root lesion nematodes. So just growing the crop is enough to reduce root lesion nematodes. My other colleague, who is a weed scientist, Dr. Andrew Mackenzie Gopsel, he's looked at weeds and how these crops can reduce weeds. And here you can see that when you grow buckwheat or mustard, you actually reduce your weed biomass. Weed biomass is what tells you how many weeds you have in your crop. So you look at the weed biomass. But if you put in different crops here, you have a higher weed biomass as compared to if you're growing buckwheat mustard. Okay, another question. Why wasn't wireworm an issue in the fall of 2019? I couldn't find any wireworms in the soil during harvest. Okay, so to answer that question, I have to ask several questions. And several factors need to be considered to understand why wireworms are not observed in 2019. The first one is, was it a problem in this field the year before? If it was, were any measures used to reduce the pressure? Because not seeing wireworms could mean that you have been using methods to suppress the population. And because you have suppressed the population, that's why you're not seeing wireworms there. So those things have to be taken into consideration. If you did not use any methods and to reduce the population, then the other questions that you have to look at, the factors that you have to consider, is what time of the year were you harvesting? Was it the middle or late, mid to late October? Because at that time, majority of the wireworms have moved down to overwinter. So you don't see them in your field if you go too late. Another factor to consider is the condition. What were the conditions when you were harvesting? Was it really dry at that time? Because if it's really dry, wireworms are very susceptible to moisture, and they will move down lower down in the soil profile towards moisture, because they desiccate very fast. So these are factors that have to be considered. Really, if you want to know if what you did really worked, it is looking at your population this year. If you go in the spring, in May and June, and put in your baits and see what you are seeing, you would know if the wireworms are there or not. Because now we know the timing that you can actually do this and be quite reliable. You can get quite reliable information at at that particular time in May and June to know if your wireworms are still there. But these could be some of the reasons why you didn't see them. They also move very fast. So as soon as they're on the top of the soil, they start moving down pretty fast. Another question, has cranberry been tested to deter wireworms? Yes, we have tried cranberry, and the wireworms are very happily feeding on them. On it, you can see a field of cranberry here, and we saw these dead spots in there. When we removed the plants, we saw they were very happily feeding on the crop. So they actually killed the crop. So because they killed the crop, we know that they are happy feeding on the cranberry. We use manure before potatoes, no wireworms here. Now I've heard that, and there's really no, I've read a lot of literature on this, and there's really no information suggesting that manure reduces wireworm populations. Just the other day, I was reading a paper that was published, and they found that they found wireworms in a pasture field under cow pats. So they are feeding on the cow pats, which tells me that they are not really repelled by them, or it's not reducing the populations. Now, in your case, I would need some more information. Like, is this the one field where you put manure? Is it a field that is actually low in populations, whereas all the other fields surrounding that field have a high population? Then we'd have to look at, is this because of the manure that you were putting in there, or is it some other reason for wireworms not coming to that field? So there's a little bit more there's a few more questions that have to be asked there before we can move forward and say, yes, manure reduces wireworm populations, or it repels wireworms. Okay. Which method burns the least carbon and has the least environmental impact? I would say the least environmental impact and least carbon burn would be mowing the crops. If you mow the crop and you keep it in the ground all over the winter, it is as a ground cover. It is protecting your soil, and so it has the least environmental impact on your soil and burns the least carbon. Cost of different rotational crops to the percent damage. Okay, so we did a study in a farmer's field, and this is what it's an approximate cost amount that I have put together here. So we had barley, and then we had mustard that was mowed, mustard incorporated, mustard that was in seed, this was the cost that we had. The rates, the cost that we had for our crop. The farmer, the grower told me that he had, usually when he grows mustard, this is what his tonnage is. It's 1.24 tons per hectare is what he gets. That's the price of, that's the price of the what you would get if you sold mustard and the barley. So at the end of the day, your net, you would have a net profit of $574 if you sold your mustard, but you would be in the negative if you mowed it or incorporated it, and 53 for your barley. So this is the crop here. You're doing the year before, you're planting mustard only for 1 year, and the next year you're going in with your potatoes. So this is the cost for your potatoes. It's the marketable yield. The marketable yield based on damage, after taking out your wireworm damage, this is what your marketable yield would be. It would be lower in the barley as compared to the mustards when you mowed it, incorporated it, or you took it for seed. And that would be your net cost after taking out your price. So in 3 years, after 2 years, 1 year of growing the rotation crop, and the second year, this is what your revenue would be. Of course, if you sold your mustard for seed, you add this to your net profit for the potato year. So your revenue would be a lot higher if you sold it for seed as compared to if you mowed it or you incorporated it. And then this would be what you would get if you grew barley.
Christine, it's Ryan here.
Yes.
Just one thing, that barley yield that you have there of a little over a ton per hectare, that's pretty low for what would be normal in PEI.
Yeah, I think I took this from Aaron Mills, because I didn't. This was what Aaron Mills had, so I wasn't sure like what
that's closer to like what a per acre yield would be, and even that
okay.
low.
Okay.
So you're probably looking at more like a 3.5 to 4 tons per hectare.
Okay. So this should be higher. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. So this profit would be a lot higher, and this would be a lot higher too.
But where you have I think where you have the mustard mode or the mustard incorporated, your net revenue on your potatoes is still still much better.
It'd be the same. Yes. Yeah. I'm not too sure about the barley because I took it from Aaron. I didn't have it for this particular field, but right. I took it from his trial. So anyway, so this is courtesy of Dr. Aaron Mills. This is a project that he's been working on. This is barley, and yeah, actually that was per acre what I had used. Sorry about that. It was actually much higher in kilograms per hectare. So the barley, he used barley timothy, buckwheat flailed, and buckwheat disc. And this is and these are the rates that he used, the cost for it. And so in the first year, when you flail it, you disc it, you mow it, you're lost, you have losses. You're in the negative in the first 2 years, and then in the potato year, this is what you gain. So what your revenue would be. This is a very rough estimate. I haven't really grown these crops completely on my own, so this is something that I'm planning on doing for the next 2 years, and seeing exactly, like actually doing a whole study on cost of production, and doing this whole for 2 years, just doing it and estimating cost of production for all these crops. But this is just a rough estimate of what we can see. Another question is there a silver bullet in sight? I would not hold my breath for a silver bullet. This is a pest that has a 5-year life cycle, and as a result of the 5-year life cycle, it really needs to be managed. You cannot just use a method for 1 year and be done with it. It's not going to work. You have to use a management strategy, and you have to use, so the best strategy that I would say would be a management strategy with a multi-pronged approach. So you're using something to reduce your wireworm damage every year, the population every year. So I don't think there's ever going to be a silver bullet for wireworms. So to end, I would like to acknowledge our funding agencies. We have we have been in a cluster project with the Canadian Hort Council for the last since 2011. So we've been doing all this research with them, and it's been great to have stable funding that we can actually do this research, and we are going to continue into this research. The next phase of it is actually looking at different crops other than buckwheat and mustard. So we're looking at sorghum, Sudan grass, we're looking at flax to see if these two crops can give us wireworm control. So we're just moving forward with different crops. And I'd really like to thank the growers that I've been working with. It has been absolutely fantastic working with these growers, and a special thank you to them for all their cooperation. This is our Charlottetown team. We have Dr. Bahar, Dr. Suqi Liu, and Natasha. These are the people in my lab who have been doing a lot of the work. Dan Ulrich comes back every year and peels potatoes. It takes a long time, him and Dave. And this is the students. These are the students that we hire every year. We hire quite a number of students to do all the research. There's a lot of work that goes into wireworm research, and the students help us out quite a lot. So this is a nice picture of Prince Edward Island, and thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, if you want to call me or ask me or email me, you're welcome to do so at any time. Thanks.
Thanks, Christine. So just before we let you go, we get two additional questions that came in on the Q&A. Mm-hmm. One is around the insecticide paralysis you talked about, particularly for the neonic insecticides. So yeah. Does it wear off, or does it eventually kill the wireworms?
No, it wears off. It wears off. I find that some of them, sometimes it lasts for quite a while, and that's why you have reduction in damage, like something by fence capture. It lasts for a long time, and you have very little damage or just surface damage on your daughter tubers. But after that, they do come back and they are fine. They actually overwinter. It's not a problem. So they do come out of it. They do feed a little bit, and then they'll overwinter, and they're fine.
Great. And the other question was, should we be concerned with clubroot with continuous use of brown mustard in a 3-year rotation? So I know there's a few folks that are worried about the potential for spreading clubroot. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. I have thoughts on that. Yes. So clubroot it could become a problem, and that's the reason why my suggestion to growers would be not to keep growing brown mustard, but you do have another crop. You do have buckwheat that you could rotate with. So it's best to do that, to grow mustard sometimes and buckwheat sometimes, and not just keep growing mustard, because it's not only the clubroot. You're also there are also insects that can become an issue, like flea beetles can become a real problem as well. So it's best not to use it. Anything that you use over and over and over again is going to cause some kind of problems. So you'll just be substituting one problem for another. So it's best to rotate, just like you rotate your chemicals. You also need to rotate your crops. And that's the reason why I'm looking at other crops right now, like flax and sorghum, Sudan grass, to see if there are some other crops out there as well, so that you have a larger number of crops that you can rotate with. But definitely do not keep growing mustard in that field over a long period of time, because you will have other issues that you're going to have to deal with later on.
Great. Okay, thanks so much, Christine. There's a lot of effort into that. It's a really comprehensive presentation. Lots of good information in there. As you see, there's Christine's contact info, and you're free to contact her anytime with additional questions you have.
Okay.
So I think next we're going to have Suqi, and so Suqi, I'm going to invite you to share your screen with us and take yourself off mute, and we'll have you start your presentation.
Okay, let's just share my screen here.
Great.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. This is Suqi. So glad that under this difficult time, this difficult situation, so we still have the chance to get together and share some new information with each other. Today, my talk will mainly focus on my novel study result about the unique function of buckwheat in a seed mixture of rotational crops. So far, there have only a few studies on the crop mixture. Data available in the literature demonstrated that multi-species have the potential to optimize across a wider range of ecosystem surveys. Such as the building soil organic matter, reducing nitrogen leaching, improving yield of the following crops, etc. According to the information from Potato Board, there are approximately 10,000 acres field planted with crop mixture last year. By planting multi-species, we are expecting to get more benefit for the soil than planting just one. And different fields have their own situation, so it's very important to choose proper species to meet their own needs. And when we select the species, we also expect that the species can do double duty, improving soil health and combating the soil-borne pest. There have several good candidates, but what I'm more interested in the buckwheat. So as Christine just mentioned, our group had been working on the buckwheat effect on wireworm control over past several years. And the study result indicated that the buckwheat can effectively suppress the wireworm population as a rotational crop. And the study conducted by AAFC Canville research group, they demonstrated that when buckwheat plant material was chopped and incorporated into the disease-infected field soil at the pre-plant amendment, the buckwheat provide protections of radish plant from damping off, and the protection of cucumber plants from both damping off and root rot. And it can also slightly increase the soil pH and indigenous fungi population. So buckwheat is a good competitor of weeds, so it has been known for many years. And just because it germinates and grows rapidly, and the dense leaf canopy can quickly shade the soil, and thus smother the weed. As buckwheat tissue contains around 1.2% nitrogen, and it can be used as a green manure crop and produced up to 3.7 tons dry matters per acre in 6 to 8 weeks after sowing. And this plant material decays very fast when plowed down and makes the nitrogen and the minor nutrients available to the succeeding crop. So buckwheat is also well known as the phosphorus scavenger, just because its roots produce a mild acid that solubilize the phosphorus and other nutrients and help their absorptions by plants. And those nutrients otherwise are unavailable to the crops. So the last but not the least benefit of buckwheat is produced by its white, beautiful flowers. So these flowers are attractive to the pollinators like honeybee and beneficial insects such as the wasps. At the rotational crop, the buckwheat also shows some disadvantage. For example, it's not strong enough to survive frost, and it's vulnerable to white mold. But what concerns me most is allelopathic effect. Allelopathy is the biochemical interaction between the different plant species. So one plant produces one or more chemicals which influence the germination, the growth, survival, or the productions of other plants. The influence of buckwheat on other plants has been known for hundreds of years, but most of the studies just focus on the weed control. For example, the buckwheat plant inhibited the growth of the 3 weed species up to 70%, and the aqueous extract of the soil cultivated with the buckwheat significantly inhibited the root elongation of 2 weed species, as compared to the soil free from buckwheat vegetation. However, the potential influence of the buckwheat and the one component of seed mixture on the growth rate of other crops was unknown. And to clarify the potential impact of buckwheat on other crops in the mixture, the 4 common rotation crops were selected as testing species. So sorghum Sudan grass selected because its dense rooting system, which can really aid in breaking up and penetrating compacted soil. And the vegetation of plants add organic matters to worn out soil. And this species is a poor host for many nematodes due to the nematicidal chemicals compounds excreted from the roots. Alfalfa. Alfalfa is representative of the legume to provide added nitrogens into the field. And also its strong taproots can break through the compacted layer. So sunflower. Sunflower can produce root exude, which extracts zinc from the soil and then release it during the following season. And this species is also known for its excellent taproot, which can easily break up the compacted soil. And besides, the blooming sunflower not only attract pollinators and beneficial insects, but it also makes the field aesthetically pleasing during the growing season. Annual ryegrass. So annual ryegrass was reported having the potential to scavenge up to 200 pounds of residual nitrogen per acre per year. And winter-killed ryegrass still can provide the weed suppression, the soil protection, and trap residual nitrogens during until the spring. And also, ryegrass attract very few insect pests. So after those 4 species was selected, the experiment was conducted in a greenhouse using those white plastic box. So the box had the capacity of 15 liters, and the surface area is around 0.1 square meter. And then the crop did at the feeding seeding rate. For example, the sorghum Sudan grass had the recommended planting rate varied from 20 to 40 pounds per acre, and we used 30 pounds in this experiment. According to the literature, there are approximately 21,000 seeds per pound, which means 156 seeds should be planted per square meter and convert to 16 seeds per box. But when the germination rate was taken into account, this seed rate was just increased to the 18. And then those 18 seeds was just evenly distributed on the surface of the box. When buckwheat was involved, it would occupy half surface area. So the sorghum Sudan seeds number was halved. And then the seed was mixed with 9 buckwheat plants. So that's the basic method we use to determine those seed numbers for of each crop used for each treatment. And a total of 8 treatments was set up, including those 4 single crop species and 4 treatments of each crop mixed with the buckwheat at a half-half ratio. And each treatment was repeated 4 times. So those crops was collected in 2 months after seeding, and 5 parameters of each individual plant was evaluated. So including the germination rate and the fresh shoot length that measured from the top of the plants to the just above ground point, like this size, and also the biomass of this part. And the root length measured from this point, the right above ground, to the tip of the longest roots, and also the root weight of the whole root system. So let's see what the result look. This graph is the germination rate. And actually, there's no significant difference was detected between the treatment with or without buckwheat, and which indicated that actually buckwheat didn't inhibit the germination of other crops when they seeded at the same time. However, the growth rate of selected crops was impacted. The shoot of all tested crops, except sunflower, was significantly shorter when buckwheat presented than their counterpart. And the shoot of this sunflower with buckwheat actually is also undersized, but it's just not statistically different from the one without buckwheat. And the biomass of all 4 crops was influenced huge. So the elongation of roots of all tested crops was significantly impacted by buckwheat, and the same as root weight. So ryegrass wasn't included in this graph just because the root system of ryegrass in buckwheat treatment was not big enough to be measured accurately. And these pictures showed us visible difference between with and without. So the smaller one is always the plants when buckwheat presented. So, is germination rate affected by buckwheat? Yes. And is crop biomass affected? Yes. And is root density affected? Yes. So it sounds pretty bad, right? But in the field practice, we don't really need proportion of buckwheat as high as 50% in the seed mixture. And we assume that with the decrease of the buckwheat percentage in the mixture, its negative effect on other crops would be decreased too. But what will wireworm react to different buckwheat proportions? Can we still obtain the reasonable wireworm control effect of buckwheat at a low plant density? We don't know, and we want to determine that. So just now, Christine just mentioned this experiment that I reported last year. And so this bioassay was conducted to test the food preference of wireworm when buckwheat, barley, and clover presented. And the results show that the higher number of wireworm chose buckwheat as their preferred food. But in this experiment, wireworm was released in the center of the box. And all different kind of food was provided just within easy reach. However, the situation is different in the seed mixture. If buckwheat proportion is pretty low in the mixture, and the limited seeds are scattered in the field and mixed with other crops. So will wireworms still want to consume their reserved energy to search for and approach the buckwheat for feeding when abundant of other food are around? So to answer those questions, we set up the second experiment to test the wireworm response to the buckwheat at the different proportions of the seed mixtures under the greenhouse condition. And this experiment included 5 treatments. So these 2 tables show the detailed information of those 5 treatments. So the buckwheat proportion in the seed mixture was decreased from 100% to 0. And then the percentage of other rotation crops was adjusted just based on the buckwheat percentage. And the second table showed the exact seed number used for each treatment based on this percentage they had in the mixture. And then this experiment actually was repeated twice using the different size larvae to confirm the result. The first bioassay included 3 repetitions, and the only small wireworm with the body weight ranged between 5 to 10 milligrams was used. And then the second bioassay had 4 replications. And in this bioassays, actually all sized larvae was involved. So this situation is more like the insect population structure in the field. And then 20 wireworms were released in each box at the seeding time, and totally 700 larvae was used. So soil was collected and thoroughly checked for wireworm in 2 months after seeding. And then the mortality and the body weight of wireworms were measured. The body weight of individual larvae was measured prior to be released and after soil collecting. And the difference between those 2 measurements was used to evaluate the influence of buckwheat at different proportions on the wireworm development. So this graph shows the wireworm mortality in all treatment. These 2 bioassays produce pretty similar mortality results, so I just combined the 2 results together as shown in this graph. As we can see, there's no statistic significance among all treatment when buckwheat presented, regardless the percentage. And the mortality of this treatment was significantly greater than the treatment without buckwheat. So the increased percentage of wireworm's body weight displayed the similar result when the similar sized larvae was used as insect material. And this larvae developed a similar growth rate in all 4 treatments with buckwheat. And those larvae, they are grows pretty, they developed pretty slow body weight, or they gained pretty less body weight compared to the ones, those ones in the buckwheat, like no buckwheat treatment. So as we know, the growth rate between small and older wireworms are different. So usually the small larvae grow pretty fast and their body weight can be doubled within a short time. But the bigger ones, they have pretty stable growth rate. So because of that, when all sized wireworms were involved in the bioassay, actually their body weight, we couldn't detect the significant difference from among all those 5 treatments. But we can still tell the difference between with and without buckwheat treatment. So in summary, the buckwheat at 20% of the seed mixture produced comparable wireworm control activity to 100% buckwheat. Now we wonder if the percentage of the buckwheat in the mixture can be reduced to 20%. Will it still produce a significant negative impact on the growth of other crops? And how bad the allelopathic effect could be? To answer these questions, we set up the third bioassay to determine the impact of buckwheat at 20% of the seed mixture on the growth of other crops. This bioassay has 2 treatments: the crop mixture with or without buckwheat. And the crop mixture was comprised of 4 crops at the same proportion. And so the method applied is exactly the same as the first experiment we just introduced previously. The impact of the buckwheat at 20% on the germination rate of other crops was similar to that of 50% buckwheat produced. And no statistic difference was observed between 2 treatments, with and without buckwheat, and for all those 4 crops. And the buckwheat influence on crop shoot length, it varies. And 20% buckwheat didn't impact the plant height of sorghum stem grass and alfalfa. However, sunflower and the ryegrass plant grow significantly faster when 20% buckwheat presented. So this result is just different, completely different from the first experiment result. The buckwheat influence on the biomass of four crops and show the similar trends. And the arrow bar is slightly overlapped here. So there's no statistic difference for sunflower, while the significant greater biomass was observed in ryegrass with 20% buckwheat. And the elongations of roots wasn't significantly affected by buckwheat for all four crops, but root weight of ryegrass was significantly increased when buckwheat presented. Here we have some pictures showing the difference between those two treatments, sorghum Sudan grass and alfalfa. So the compared two treatments are no visible difference for those crops. And sunflowers shoot height was significantly different between these two treatments. And that one collected from the buckwheat treatment is just too long to fit into the bag. So I have to break this down. And this one is just its original size. And those ryegrass show the visible difference with and without buckwheat. So when we compare the responses of ryegrass to different buckwheat density, the growth rate showed opposite trend. And that means the buckwheat plant extrudates conducted different functions on certain crops at different concentrations. We don't know yet, and it needs to be further studied. In conclusion, the buckwheat significantly scaled down the growth rate of sorghum Sudan, alfalfa, sunflower, and ryegrass when planted at half-half ratio. And the buckwheat at 20% of the seed mixture produced comparable wireworm control activity to 100% buckwheat. And the growth rate of those four crops wasn't significantly inhibited by buckwheat at 20% of the seed mixture, while the growth of ryegrass was stimulated. Before ending up my presentation, I just want to mention that all presented result was obtained under the greenhouse condition. And we know in the field, the situation is different. So the on-farm trials are required to verify those results. And if you are interested in this project and want to be involved, you can just contact me or Christine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Suqi.
Yep.
We have, if anybody has any questions for Suqi, I'll give another minute or so to put your questions in the Q&A box. Yep. But some really interesting work there. I think the potential of being able to incorporate buckwheat maybe into some other normal mixtures at lower rates might help bring down some of the cost for people's wireworm control and still have the benefits of other crops for building organic matter or things like that. So that could be
right, exactly.
Could be very interesting.
Yeah, hopefully those information can help our farmers at some extent. So yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions here just the moment.
Okay.
You can feel free to add them and we can ask them at the end.
Yes, no problem at all. Yep.
Well, thanks a lot, Suqi.
No problem.
So next, we have Lorraine MacKinnon from the PEI Department of Agriculture and Land. And Lorraine's going to share results of some work that's been done the last in 2019 on the click beetle survey results that were done, which is a collaboration between the Department of Agriculture and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So I'll turn it over to Lorraine.
Thanks, Ryan. Can everyone hear me okay?
I hear you. You're a little muffled, but it's not too bad.
Okay. And screen looks good. Okay, so I'll get started. So thanks everybody for joining the call today. The next thing I'd like to do is present the results of the ClickBeetle survey that was undertaken in 2019. So back in May, June, a little bit into July. And I want to thank the collaborators on the project. Staff at PEI Department of Agriculture and Land included Carol Banks, who did the large majority of the collections, and Sebastian Ibarra, who helped out as well. And Agriculture and Agri-Food provided guidance and expertise on doing the project. So Christine Norohna and Natasha Moser-Gallant, I would like to extend thanks to them as well. And of course, the project was made possible through the Canadian Horticulture Council cluster funding, which Christine had mentioned earlier. The ClickBeetle survey, it happens about every 3 or 4 years on PEI. We've selected 85 sites, and these remain consistent for the most part. We use the same sites every time the survey is done. At each site, there's 3 traps laid out, and they have pheromones inside. And those pheromones are specific to 3 species that the Department of Agriculture and Ag Canada want to look at, which are Agriotis lineatus, Agriotis obscurus, and most importantly, Agriotis spitator. And keep in mind, as we go forward in this presentation and I'm presenting the numbers, I'm mostly going to talk about the Agriotis spitator population dynamics. It's the species that's greatest abundance, and it's also the one that's kind of the trickiest one to control as well. But we wanted to kind of look at these 3 species and trap with pheromones to get a sense of populations of all of them. The traps were set out the first week of May in 2019, and collections were done weekly until July 4th. We extended the collections a little bit into July because of the fact that it was a cold, wet spring, and Christine advised us that the peak might have been pushed back a little bit, so we kept going through until July 4th. After that, the specimens were sorted and counted, and the data was tabulated by Mary Smith, who is a former technician of Christine Norohna's. This map shows all of the sites and where they're located across the island. As you can see, it's pretty well tip to tip. And on the right-hand side here, you can see an example of the trap that was used. In the past years, other traps have been developed, but for the purposes of the ClickBeetle survey, the department wanted to use consistent trapping methods right from 2009 onward. So we stuck with these traps. And so black plastic, the beetles enter at either end, and once they've entered, they cannot get out, and the pheromone is attached inside the trap. The fields were not necessarily potato fields. We are doing this for the benefit of all producers that struggle with wireworm damage, be they corn, cereals, carrots, rutabagas, or potatoes. So the fields were selected across the island, and this year they could have been in any crop. It could have been forage, it could have been potatoes or carrots or cereals. It could have been really a whole diversity of crops that were planted where the traps were. So again, going back to 2009, so a decade of ClickBeetle surveys now. And that year there was 60 sites selected, but since 2012, we've had 85 fields trapped throughout the province. Let's take a look at the numbers then. In Western PEI, we've got this split into 2 separate regions. North Prince would be sort of from this green line upwards. So Larry is right on the border of that line, and it would include Cape Wolf, Elmsdale, Alberton, Tignish, and so on. And in that part of the island, the 2016 numbers, there were 10 beetles collected, 10 spitator collected in that year. This past year, there were 87 beetles collected. So that is an increase, but when you look at the scale of numbers as we go on, you'll see that that is a really low number of beetles compared to other regions. Something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it is really enough to cause serious concern about crop damage, but we will keep an eye on those numbers. And again, I'm focusing on the spitatter column. You can also see the other species are listed here, but I'm mainly going to be talking about spitatter. In South Prince, which is from this slide downwards, so West Cape, West Point, Coleman, Tyne Valley, Richmond, through to the Wellington area. In 2016, 387 spitatter beetles were trapped, and this past season, only 43, a reduction in that region. I took the numbers and put it as an average per trap for the season, and that's because in some sites, there's been different numbers of traps throughout the decade. So if we look at the average number of spitatter beetles collected per trap for the entire project, again, North Prince, there's an increase here, but check out the scale here. I'm only looking at between 0 and 12 on average per trap. So that's still pretty low. What you're going to see in a lot of these graphs is a peak in 2016 and a decline for 2019. So this is the first time we're seeing that here in South Prince region. So it peaked in 2016 at about 43 beetles per trap, now down to 5. Central PEI, there are 4 different regions that we're looking at here. I'll start with Northeast Central. So this would be the region between Cavendish and about Stanhope along the North Shore and north of Charlottetown. In 2016, 3,339 beetles. 2019, down to 1,379 beetles. A nice reduction in this area. In South Central PEI, so this is kind of the Charlottetown area, going through to Cornwall, Meadowbank, Rice Point, up to Crapo on the western border of this region. Very happy to report that although in 2016 over 14,000 click beetles were trapped, in 2019 only 7,000 spitatter click beetles were trapped. Well, that's a very positive movement in the population of the spitatter click beetle. Moving over to Southwest Central PEI, in 2016 this region trapped about 2,000 spitatter beetles, and in 2019 is just over 200. And there was a difference in the number of traps in these areas, so we'll look at the average per trap there as well in Southwest Central PEI. And that'd be from Crapo through the Borden, Kincora, and Bedeck areas. In Northwest Central PEI, this would be Summerside, Sherbrooke, Kensington, Malpeque, through to Stanley Bridge, and then over to Route 2. The numbers here are presented in a different color because I want to talk about this area. There were 15 sites in this area, which was a pretty large number of traps that had previously been quite a problem or a hot zone. That you can see that the numbers they haven't really changed much. But in fact, what I did in this region, there was one outlier. One of the sites trapped over 7,000 spitatter click beetles in 2019. And when I looked at it and compared it to the remaining 14 sites in that region, it really didn't represent the trends that were happening. No other sites had increased that dramatically, including the ones that were in close proximity. So for the purposes of data analysis, I removed that playing field. The grower has been notified, and Christine Norohna is interested in following up with him on what's going on, what's the history, and is there damage showing up. So again, 3 of these 4 sites in Central PEI have gone down in click beetle populations, some quite substantially, and Northwest Central is kind of a bit of a plateau. So again, average number of beetles trapped for the whole season, Northwest Central, a slight increase here from 2016 to 2019, not dramatic. And Southwest Central, a reduction from 300 beetles per trap down to less than 50. And just a reminder, I'm only speaking about the Agriotis spitatter species. So the other two regions in central PEI, again, both peaked in 2016 at 360 roughly down to 150, and then South Central from about 1,800 beetles per trap down to just over 900. So yeah, again, the scales are something that I want you to take note of. These were big numbers in past years, you know, going up to 1,800 beetles per trap on average for the season was quite a large number, and we've dropped down to just over 800. So that's tremendous. Looking at Eastern PEI, Southeast Queens. So this kind of Charlottetown through to Mount Stewart, Montague, Mary River, Wood Islands. This includes the Orwell and Pownal parts of the island. So the numbers in 2016, there were 19,351 spitatter beetles trapped. And in 2019, we went down to 5,464. So another quite dramatic drop in spitatter numbers. North Kings, the final region of the island, so kind of Fortune, St. Peter's Bay, Baltic, Surrey area, 1,387 spitatter, and it increased a little bit up to 1,589 in this region. So it's a small increase, not the dramatic increases we've seen in other years. Something to keep an eye on for sure in that area. So average per trap for South King, Southeast Queens, so just east of Charlottetown. It peaked in 2016, 1,200 beetles per trap, and then now down to less than 400. North Kings, a slight increase there from 2016 with 100 beetles per trap to about 115 in 2019. So those are the spitatter numbers for the island. I'm just going to point out a few things that we've observed with the Agriotis obscurus and Agriotis lineatus species. Most of the sites had less than 20 of each of those species, which is why I'm not really putting a great deal of emphasis on them. A couple of areas did have somewhat larger numbers than 20 per trap, but on the whole, they're mostly declining. And also the native species, which are also watched, excuse me, are also declining. I wanted to show a little bit about the range of numbers of beetles per trap for the last decade. So you can see that in in past years, the distribution, most of the traps had between 1 and 10 or 11 and 50 click beetles per trap, and then it was gradually getting more dispersed over a larger range, where we had there were 16 traps that had between 100 and 500 beetles per trap in 2016. And note too that in 2016 there were 12 traps that had over 1,000 click beetles. In 2019 there were only 4 traps that had over 1,000 beetles. One of them is the one I previously mentioned that I removed from the analysis, that outlier that had 7,000 click beetles. Another one was a permanent pasture, which I guess we would expect to see high levels of click beetles in the permanent pasture. And the other 2 fields that had over 1,000 had just over 1,000, and they were in kind of closer to Charlottetown, in the Tarentum and Cornwall areas, but they were still under 1,500 per trap. This is the overall trend of Agriotis spitatter click beetles trapped on the island. So this is the average per trap for the whole decade, as well as for this whole season. So we started out, trapping on average low numbers of spitatter per trap, and then we increased through to 2016 when just over 500 on average for the island were being trapped. And in 2019, we've dropped down to 250 per trap. So cut that average per trap number in half. I'll note as well, this actually does include that outlier field. So when it threw the data off for the region where that field's located, but it didn't really throw off the data for the whole island. So the key findings throughout this survey, the total number of click beetles that were trapped in 2016 were 47,095. In 2019, we only trapped 24,216. And again, that's all species of click beetles. Agriotis spitatter made up 96% of all the click beetles that were trapped in 2019. And only 4 traps had over 1,000 beetles compared to 12 traps in 2016. I guess I do want to mention the fact that although the numbers have mostly decreased since 2016 in the different regions, most of them are still showing an increase over the 2012 click beetle survey. I think it's important to note, for so long we've been told that we have to reduce the population of wireworms and click beetles on PEI, and we've seemed to have rounded a corner in most areas. Even in the areas where the numbers have gone up, they haven't gone up dramatically. And so I think it's very encouraging and very, very promising, I guess, for the future of crop production on PEI. And I want to note as well that with this click beetle survey, we cannot make a direct link to the causation. Why are the numbers declining? So each survey year, we know what crop is being grown when the traps are set out, but we don't keep track of what's being grown in the non-survey years. So we don't have a good handle on the crop rotations for these 85 fields. And therefore we can't really say the cause of the reduction of click beetles. However, I think there's so much work that's been done on rotational crops and mechanical controls and even chemical controls. And I think that we've come so far, and much of that research could be attributed to the reduction in the click beetle numbers. And that's all I had. That's the results of our click beetle survey in 2019. Happy to see a reduction in a lot of areas, some large reduction in some hot spots, and I'm happy to take some questions.
So Lorraine, there's a couple of questions here. One of them says Hypnoides click beetle population is increasing. Do we have any plans to monitor it?
We are monitoring Abbreviatus hypnoides. We are monitoring that species. I did look at the numbers quickly for that one in this year's click beetle survey results. They weren't large in number, but it is being monitored certainly.
Okay, so
it's one that Christine's quite interested in too.
It's being monitored, but you didn't see really big numbers of that one. Christine, I don't want to add anything to that.
Yeah, Ryan, we have been monitoring hypnoides ever since we started. So we do have numbers for the hypnoides as well, and we're going to continue to monitor for hypnoides.
Great. And then there was a question about whether we think there's any correlation of higher acreage of buckwheat and mustard crops with the reduction of click beetle numbers.
Again, we don't have a way to make a direct linkage to that with these fields that we have been trapping in. I think it would stand to reason based on the fact that Christine and Suqi's research has shown that it will reduce populations. But
the thing that I noticed, Lorraine, that the two areas that I would say were, in the past were the really big hotspots. The southern Queens, like just west of Charlottetown and just east of Charlottetown, those were the highest areas in the past, and they were the areas that saw the biggest decline. Were also the areas I would say that have had the highest amount of mustard and buckwheat grown in the last few years.
Yeah, and those producers have been working pretty diligently over the decade to make that happen. I want to mention too, Ryan, if there's anybody listening in who was so if you're in your field and you're curious to know what the numbers were, please give me a call. I'd be happy to share that information with you.
Lorraine, you may want to repeat that. You kind of fuzzed out there for a second, so just repeat what you just said.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to mention that if anybody is listening and they were a participant in the Click Beetle survey this year, so if we put traps in your field in May and June and you want to know what the numbers were, I'd be happy to provide those numbers to individual producers.
Great. And there's also a question here, is the criteria to select the fields in 29, was it different than previous years?
In 2019?
Yeah.
Okay.
So to clarify, we went back into the same fields that we used in the previous years, correct?
That is right. So right from 2009, 2012, 2016, and 2019, as much as possible, we used the same fields.
Right.
There was some, we might have had to use the field next door on one or two instances, but for all intents and purposes, the same locations were used, the same sites were used. And there wasn't in selecting the fields, we weren't choosing the crops or things like that. We were really just wanting to get, and I say it's my predecessors, former Department of Agriculture staff, and in conjunction with Christine, just wanting to get an accurate representation from the whole island. So it didn't really matter crop rotation or anything like that. Those things weren't a factor in selecting the sites.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot, Lorraine. That's super. Just before Sebastian shares his screen to give us the last part of the update, I'm just going to remind anybody that you can share this, you can scan this QR code to receive CEUs immediately using the CCA app, or you can send me your name and CCA number through the question and answer, and I will be able to get you CEU credits for today's seminar. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sebastian. Sebastian's going to just give us a bit of an update on insecticide availability and registration updates just for a few minutes. So go ahead, Sebastian.
Okay, hello, thanks, Ryan. Let me just share here the screen. There we go. Can you see it all?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to give a brief update on the pesticides that are currently registered for management wireworm, as well as what may be in the horizon. So currently, the products that are registered to manage wireworm on potato are Capture, Thiamate, a couple of products that contain chlorpyrifos as the active ingredient, as well as there are a couple of products that contain clothianidin, such as Titan or Nipsit, that are only for suppression. Christine has touched on the reasons why some of these products have labels such as suppression only. And here I have in italics products that are named Cymigra and Taraxa. They are under the registration process. They are being evaluated by Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency. And once they review all of the package, they will put a registration consultation that will be up for 45 days, and they will receive comments, and then they will make a final decision after that. So I'll just go briefly on the status of each of these products, where they are today and where they will be within the next couple of years. The first one is Capture. Bifenthrin was recently reevaluated, and Health Canada determined that the active ingredient in capture meets the definition of a Track 1 substance, and the policy under Health Canada for substances that meet Track 1 substance is that they should be virtually eliminated from the environment. And so that was published in 2017, and so the phase out period was as follows. The last date for sale by registrant was December 31st, 2018. The last sale by retailers was this past December 31st of 2019, and the last date of permitted use will be this season. So you can still use capture this season. The registrant intends to resubmit data that may address some of the concerns that led to PMRA labeling this active ingredient as a Track 1 substance. The next product is Thymate. The registration of this product expires in 2022, and it's up to the registrant to renew this product. PMRA will begin a reevaluation of this active ingredient on the product between this year and next year. And the next product, it's not very commonly used here in the island, pyrophos or pyronex. There are some MRL issues, as it says there on the first bullet. There is no allowed residue of chlorpyrifos for products exported to the US. It recently went through a reevaluation process with PMRA, and PMRA has proposed to cancel most agricultural uses, including wireworm on potatoes. The consultation period for this proposal finished last year in August, and PMRA is currently assessing the comments received through that consultation process and will publish the final decision. It's just not been published yet when that final decision will be. The next products are products that contain clothianidin, and these are for suppression only. As you may know, clothianidin is a neonicotinoid, and these products have gone through several rounds of reevaluations and special reviews. The most recent one was the special review on honeybees, and it concluded that clothianidin use as a potato seed piece is an acceptable risk. However, there are still other steps that this active ingredient needs to go through, and those include special reviews on squash bees, aquatic invertebrates, and its general reevaluation. An expected final decision for the special review on aquatic invertebrates and the proposed decision on the general reevaluation will be published in the fall 2020. Keep in mind this may be affected due to the current pandemic, as PMRA is suffering from different things that are taking place as everybody else. The most conservative proposal on all of the reviews that are taking place is to cancel all agricultural uses of these products. So those are the products that are currently available, and keep in mind that they should be used in conjunction with the techniques and strategies that everybody here has presented, including the use of brown mustard as well as buckwheat. What's in the horizon, or what may be in the horizon, depending on what the federal regulator concludes, are two products that contain the active ingredient called broflanilide. And the two products are Cymigra and Taraxa. Cymigra will be an in-furrow application for potatoes and corn, and Taraxa will be a seed treatment for cereal crops, including wheat, barley, oats, and rye. The efficacy of this active ingredient in the products has been tested in PEI in British Columbia, and our registration decision is to be determined. And there will be a consultation period once that's done. Options for grains and other field crops include these three neonicotinoids, as you are familiar with them: imidacloprid, thimethoxam, and clothianidin. We got Alias, Stress Shield, Sombrero, Gaucho. These all contain the same active ingredients, and they are registered for use in wheat, barley, oats, and a number of other field crops. Thimethoxam has other field crops as well, including lentils and faba beans. And Nipsit also has use for wheat and corn. Keep in mind, all of these active ingredients are neonicotinoids, and they are going through the same lens of review as what I discussed previously for clothianidin. And a final decision for all of those special reviews is yet to be published. There are other groups of insecticides, including the diamides. There's Fortenza and Lumivia. Fortenza is registered for use in corns and soybeans, and Lumivia is registered for use in corn, wheat, barley, oats, and rye. Keep in mind that some of these active ingredients have been tested for efficacy in different genera of click beetles, such as limonias, some of these click beetles that are more prominent in the prairie provinces. Another group of insecticide are the pyrethroids. Bifenthrin is a pyrethroid, and tefluthin is a pyrethroid, and we currently have tefluthin with the name of Forest, registered for use in corn. And so thanks for your patience. I have a toddler walking around, and here I have a picture of buckwheat to remind that we should be using all of these strategies in combination with the active ingredients. As it's been mentioned before, there is no silver bullet. And so even though there may be new active ingredients on the horizon, we should not stop using these rotation crops. So to summarize, the products that are available for potatoes for the 2020 season are Capture, Thymid, and Titan and/or Nipsit. Products available in 2021 will be Thymid and Titan, maybe Cymigra, it depends on the registration decision. And Capture may be available in the future if PMA reviews new data to be submitted by registrants. This could take months or years. Both Titan, Nipsit, and Thymid may be on a phase-out period in the future depending on the reevaluation of the decisions. And so with that, I may take some questions, and again, I thank you for your patience.
So Sebastian, just a couple of quick questions. There's a question about efficacy of Cymigra and Taraxa compared to Thymid. That might be better answered by Christine, but that is the question that we have.
Yeah, so I'll gladly defer to Christine if she's happy to take on that question. I have personally not conducted any trials with its active ingredient. I've heard that it has some efficacy, but again, I bet direct to the people that have been working with it. So if Christine, you've got anything to add?
Yes, I do. On my presentation that I showed, the very last line was about this product. It is about this product we had used, and it is just as good as Thymid. It's working. It's got the same type of efficacy as Thymid. So we were really happy to see that it works just as well, and it also, like Thymid, it kills wireworms.
Great. And there's a question about PERFOS status with other horticultural crops. So do we know if there's any, like, is chlorpyrifos still going to be available in the short term for other horticultural crops?
Yes, so chlorpyrifos is still available until the final decision is made. Just give me 1 second here. I'm just yeah, so we are still waiting for the final decision. Chlorpyrifos is an important active ingredient for other pests. Particularly, I'm thinking it's the only active ingredient available for rutabaga producers to control Delia species. So they may have received a number of comments, and they are going over the potential. They're going over through all of the comments received through the process. So by the time they publish their final decision, it'll come with a phase-out period, if that's what it ultimately comes down to. They may refine their assessment, which may conclude that some crops may keep this active ingredient.
Right. Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Okay, so That, I think, concludes most of the, oh, sorry, I have one more question here. And this question is actually, I think it goes more towards Christine and or Suqi. So it's about the allelopathic effects of buckwheat on other crops. Do we think there's any evidence that a buckwheat crop has any effect on the following crop in the same year? So specifically, if somebody, planted buckwheat in the spring, chopped it and worked it in, and then planted brown mustard afterwards, would there be any impact on the mustard crop from the preceding crop of buckwheat?
Ryan, as Christine, no, I don't think so. It wouldn't last that long. Those allelopathic effects don't last as that long that it would go into the next year.
Or even the next, like the next crop within the same year?
The next crop, no, it's not like mustard, because mustard has more of a fumigant, right, properties. Yeah. So it would stop if you plant right after that. But I don't think buckwheat would do that. But it's something that we can test for sure to see if it would do that. And I don't know if Suqi has seen anything like this in her trials.
Yes, actually, I did read a paper published last year. So that study conducted the buckwheat effect on the weeds in the field. So what they did, they let the buckwheat grow for 15 days, and then they just cut off the above ground and leave the roots in the field for another 7 days, and then they plant the wheat seed into that field. So the wheat grows for 30 days. Actually, the biomass of the wheat wasn't being significantly influenced. So that's the bioassays in the field. But I in the lab, actually under the lab conditions, and the buckwheat compounds with the water, and then they spray those waters on the top of the soil, and then they plant this seed, the wheat, right? The wheat seeds at a different time. So they wait 1 week, 2 weeks, and 3 weeks. So what they found is pretty interesting. Like within the first 2 weeks, actually the germination of the weed wasn't influenced. But in 3 weeks, so when they planted the weed, in 3 weeks, actually the germination rate was impacted. So there's different situations, but in the field, as Christine said, I don't think those, because the active compounds usually is the phenolic. So I don't think the compounds can last to the next year, to affect the next rotation crops. But how long they can exist in the field for during the same year, not quite sure. Yeah.
Right, but largely we would think that if somebody was going to mow down a crop of buckwheat and then maybe no-till mustard into it, or just plant mustard into it, we wouldn't really expect to see much impact of buckwheat on the next crop.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
Okay, so with that, I think.
Can I just add one more thing? I just wanted to say that, I know we're seeing lower numbers of wireworms, but that does not mean that we should become complacent. They have decreased, but we do need to keep up on on trying to reduce the population even further.
Right. Oh, good to note. Okay, so I don't think I have any other additional questions. So I really want to thank our panelists for participating. This is our first kick at the can at this, and I think it went reasonably well. We had a good attendance. We had over 100 people on today from all over the country. So that's very interesting, but definitely mostly here from PEI. So Thank you to Christine and Suqi and Lorraine and Sebastian for their participation. Thank you everybody for attending. As I said, there will be a version of this available up on YouTube, hopefully in the next couple of days, and it'll be linked on the PEI Potato Agronomy site. And we'll also try and make these individual presentations available there as well if you just want to look at PDFs of the presentations. So with that, thanks very much. I hope everybody is taking the advice of our health officials and social distancing and staying at home, and hopefully we'll see some progress on that in the near future. And hopefully this will be a temporary thing. And thank you so much for your participation. Have a great day, everybody.